Hello, everyone. Hello, Musica Tra Amici supporters and subscribers and friends and fans. I'm Evan Leslie. I'm part of the team that helps produce and host the Musica Tra Amici concerts. And I'm also very excited because we haven't seen you in a while, and our first concert of the 2023-2024 season is coming up really soon. It's on Sunday, November 12th at 7 p.m. And it's a concert devoted entirely to Johannes Brahms. The musicians love playing Brahms, and I know all of us love hearing it. And so today, Musica Tra Amici artistic director and cellist Brenton Smith is here, along with a very special guest, an expert on Brahms, his life and his music, a friend and a fellow cellist also, Styra Avins. She's the person behind this really extraordinary book, Johannes Brahms' Life and Letters. And she's generous enough to join us here on Zoom and record for us so that we can give you a bit of a preview of all the music we're going to be enjoying on November 12th. So Styra, first of all, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have you.
Well, I like nothing better than to talk about Brahms. And I have to say that when I got involved in doing this, my husband was a little put out, but he said he was glad to live in a ménage à trois where the third person had been dead for 150 years.
Brenton, you're the person who introduced us to Styra. Can you tell us a little bit about her and about your relationship with her?
Well, she can tell you more about her, but I will tell you that I was discussing with my friend, the violinist Gil Shaham. We were talking about the different Brahms biographies and talking about the frustration. And he said, no, the one you need to read for sure is this. Coincidentally, looks kind of like yours too. Oh, it's this Brahms Life and Letters. And he says, by this woman, Styra Avins, I don't know anything about her. So I happened to mention this to a friend of mine here in Houston, Nora Klein, and she said, yes, that's my sister. So she put us in contact, and we actually, with Gil's family and my family, we all went down to meet her near her house for sushi. And I got to know Styra and her husband, and they are really quite incredible, fascinating people. And I think I have to agree with Gil. This is the best book on Brahms, and I think she is really the person I am most interested in talking to when I talk about Brahms. And Styra, of course, was also a wonderful cellist, studied with Luigi Silva. And and I think you wrote the liner notes for the recent Brahms CD that Gil did. And so she is always my go-to person for Brahms questions. And I try to answer a few cello string questions in return. And she actually was kind of the inspiration for this program when she started talking about Brahms' vocal chamber music and how important this was to him.
Well, I don't know if you know this, Styra, but our series is called Musica Tra Amici, Music Among Friends. The whole premise is that music brings friends together, families together. So I love that that's how you were introduced to Brenton.
That's true. Well, it was a rather weird coincidence. My sister is my twin. And when I was once in Houston for a meeting and met people who knew her, one of them literally almost fainted because he couldn't believe that I wasn't my sister. We do look alike. Anyway, we're both interested in music, but she's a doctor and I'm not. Anyway, I would love to say something about home music making, if this is the appropriate place to do it.
Of course.
It's something that doesn't happen very much now, but these vocal quartets were Brahms's way of doing something which to him was not only natural, but very important, which is to encourage making music at home, which was much more common in the 19th century, especially the second half of the 19th century than it is now, partly because there were no recordings and radio and television and all that, but also people were much more musically literate. I mean, technically, everybody had a piano, everybody. I mean, that was a middle-class instrument. And most kids had music lessons and could read music. When I, now let's say 20 years ago, wanted to get my friends together to read through these vocal quartets, I have very good pianist friends, I had a hard time finding enough people who could sight sing. Now, that was not an issue in the 19th century. And so these pieces, which are really quite gorgeous, as you'll hear, I hope, very rarely get to the concert stage. For one thing, it's expensive to hire 4 singers instead of just 1, or at most 2. And it's not done casually the way Brahms wanted it in the home. So you're very lucky, I think, to get 3 of his very, very most wonderful vocal quartets. Sometimes they're sung with a small chorus, which was okay by Brahms. He didn't mind that. But he did, they were published in both versions, I think. But he did intend them for people to get together with a good pianist friend and make music.
Well, it's exciting for us. I can't wait to hear them. I think they're beautiful when I've listened to recordings of them. But one of the things I'm really excited about is that singers from the Houston Symphony Chorus are our vocal soloists for this concert. And a lot of our musicians are Houston Symphony musicians, but we've never had a chance to kind of spread our arms wide to embrace a little bit more of that Houston Symphony family and bring in the choristers as the as musicians on our program. Styra, you know, there's this bit in your book here that I was kind of really intrigued by. You were writing about Brahms and the fact that you were giving some context for some letters that he was writing between 1871 and 1876 once he had settled in Vienna. And you were talking about how it took him quite a while to write the first symphony, but you made a very interesting point. You said perfectionism rather than timidity is the more likely reason he refrained from producing his first symphony until age 43. He was unwilling to publish for orchestra until he had worked with one himself. Brahms' entire creative life follows a pattern of writing almost exclusively for musical combinations he is personally familiar with. I thought that was really interesting. Could you talk a little bit more about that, especially with the context of these particular pieces that we have on our program?
Oh, yes. Well, to me, it's so obvious. In fact, I've written a long article about this in the, what's it called? It's a British journal that came out a few years ago called Brahms and Beethoven in the Famous Footsteps, because everybody quotes something which Brahms never said, by the way. This is a spurious quote, not uncommon in Brahms history. Oh, you have no idea what it's like to write a symphony and hear those footsteps behind you, meaning Beethoven. This is just not real. But I guarantee that if you read program notes at any concert you go to for the first symphony, you will read that quote. But the fact is a terribly simple one. The very first pieces he ever wrote were for piano, which he played. He heard chamber music at home as a child. His father played the violin and the double bass and the horn, and he was a typical early professional musician, which means he played a little bit of everything. He accompanied singers as a young man. He was already well known as an accompanist in Hamburg and accompanied the most famous singer in Hamburg when he was 16 years old. So his opus 3 is songs, quartets, piano quartets, vocal music for chorus, because he had a women's chorus. He gathered together about 30 girls when he was in Hamburg as a young man and wrote music for them. And that's sort of the genesis of what you're going to hear tonight, that his experience in writing vocal music was tremendous by the time he wrote what you're going to hear. And when he was about 25 years old, his greatest desire was to conduct the orchestra and chorus in Hamburg. That job didn't come to him, one of his great disappointments, which he never really got over, as if he had been abandoned by his hometown, Hamburg, and the job went to someone else. But he's on record as saying that his desire is to work with chorus and orchestra. That happened in 1871 when he was offered that job in Vienna, the Gesellschaft der Musikfreunde, which was an amateur orchestra enforced and strengthened by professionals when necessary, and their Singverein, their choral society. So there he had it, and he had that job until 1875. When he left the job, within 1 year, the first symphony was finished. And then the next year, another symphony, and it.
I love that point that his music writing was influenced by his music making. I think that's a beautiful thing to understand about him. So I told you that our series is premised on friendship, and of course your book is full of letters, and the third one in the book is to a fellow musician friend of Brahms. Maybe you can help us just connect the dots here. This is Brahms and Joseph Joachim right there. And
Yes.
then it's the third letter in your book is to that friend of his. There's one other interesting figure I was curious you might tell us about. Maybe you recognize who this person is with Brahms. Who's that?
It's Remenyi, I think. Am I right?
Yes, that's it.
Yeah. Well, Remenyi is a fascinating character. He was a Hungarian violinist who took part in the Hungarian Revolution of 1848, was thrown out for his life. I mean, he fled to Hamburg. There were a lot of Hungarian refugees taking refuge in Hamburg at that time. Remenyi was a very, very well-trained violinist who, by the way, had a long career in America and died on stage in the midst of a concert. But anyway, he in a certain sense is the one who was able to take Brahms out of his obscurity, because I can't remember how they got to know about each other, but Brahms and he would concertize together. And eventually when Brahms was 19, Remenyi and he went on a little tour, a tiny little tour in North Germany. And that is where Remenyi, who knew Joachim, who was a fellow student in Vienna, took him to see Joachim in Göttingen. Doesn't matter where that is. Joachim was already one of the most famous young musicians in all of the German-speaking countries of Germany, a brilliant violinist, even by the age of 13. He's the one who revived the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto. And Joachim instantly recognized Brahms's genius, sent him to visit Schumann.
How does our, one of the pieces on the program, or a few of them actually, are the Hungarian dances. Is there any connection between these two guys and those pieces?
Yes, very, very much. Remenyi is the one who he must have introduced Brahms, and Brahms he loved those dances. They were not his own music. If you look at the publication of the Hungarian dances, there's no opus number. It says arranged by Johannes Brahms. And many, many years later, when that music had become so famous and helped make Brahms financially independent, Remenyi sued him, saying they're really his music. Remenyi lost the suit, but it was a pain in the neck for Brahms, who had to go to court and his publisher, and it's a funny story in a way. But Brahms was in the clear because he never claimed that they were his music. Actually, 2 or 3 of them in the second set, I believe, are his composition.
So, Brenton, are you making yourself liable for potential litigation with this concert for any reason? I think you said you were.
These, I had the idea to arrange a few of these for violin and cello, especially since my wife is playing the rest of the program. I wanted to give her some time off. And the way, to me, the way you really get to know a piece is to arrange it, to take it apart and try to put it for other instruments. So I would call these less arrangements and maybe derangements. But we have number 1, I think we'll have number 1, number 6, and number 11 from the 3 of these. It's a little bit challenging if you just put the melody in the violin all the time and let the cello have the accompaniment all the time. it would be pretty simple and pretty organic, but I'm stubborn and I wanted to play the melody sometimes. So we have to invert the counterpoint a little bit. But I think these, I mean, of the things that everyone knows about Brahms, I mean, certainly they know the lullaby, they know a few other things, but so many people know and love these Hungarian dances. And to me, it's so interesting how Brahms was able to absorb this character, which was not really his, but I mean, it's unmistakably Brahms, but it's not Brahms.
You mean the Hungarian character?
Yes, and the kind of I mean, I think when we say Hungarian, we're really referring more to Romani, to gypsy music. That this is rather than Hungarian folk music, but this is this character, which I think we're all drawn to as musicians because there's such a freedom and such a rhythmic zest and innovation in their music. I mean, some of my favorite bands even today are modern day gypsy bands like Janoska Ensemble and things like that. And so I think it's natural to love these things. And he just did such an amazing job of living in that world and making something that was Brahms, but not Brahms.
That's great. So we can look forward to that rhythmic zest, that freedom that you were just talking about.
Well, I should hope. Well, they're not actually. They're urban gypsy. It's not real gypsy music, by the way, but it's very, very, very popular, and it has that wonderful Czardas ending. Yadam, badalada. And so Remenyi, when he would play Beethoven violin sonatas, he would sometimes at the cadence put in one of the little Czardas endings.
Cool.
But Remenyi was a marvelous violinist. He was a court favorite of Queen Victoria. He really got around, but he and Brahms did not part friends, actually. So.
That's okay. Is it true, Styra, that Brahms was, I thought for most of his life, he would go even in the streets of Vienna and go listen to gypsies, go listen to the local street bands and cafe bands?
Yeah, but not in the streets. He would go to the Prater, where there was always a gypsy band. And when he was in Budapest, he would. But much more interesting than that, he and Joachim took a trip in 1878 to Transylvania. And I have to send you the article I wrote about that, Brenton. It's got a lot of information that I don't want to bore your audience with now. But one of the things that he particularly wanted and was given was a concert of real gypsy music in Hermannstadt, which is at the border of Romania and Bulgaria, I think, actually. But at the time, it was all part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And he was particularly interested in real folk music. But you didn't find it in the streets in Vienna.
You know, I don't know when exactly our audience will see this, but we're recording this on October 29th. So I kind of like the idea of Brahms in Transylvania. It's very spooky.
Oh, it was a marvelous trip, actually. And unfortunately, none of the biographies cover it entirely. I was able to do it by getting help from someone in the Romanian cultural at the Romanian Cultural Attaché in New York, who put me in touch with all sorts of newspapers of the time, which are online now, and I could read the reviews and get help from librarians there. So I have the newspaper reviews of those concerts, and they're really very fascinating. I'll send it to you, Brenton.
So at the risk, you know, I hope our audience will humor me and humor us. We've got 3 cello players here. So this might be a bit of a cello geek moment. I hope y'all don't mind, but there's a moment in the concert that I am especially looking forward to on November 12th. And it's the 3rd movement of the piano, the piano quartet that we'll be hearing. Brenton is going to play this notoriously enchanting, gorgeous line. So I just want everybody to look forward to that. And Brenton, I want to ask you, and maybe Styra, you could talk about this too. because you're a cello player as well. I guess two things. One, what was Brahms' relationship with the cello? It seems like, I don't think it's just me being a cellist, but like in the piano concerto, the gorgeous cello solo, this quintet, the beautiful cello solo, what was Brahms' relationship with the cello? And then two, I'm curious, Brenton, when you are preparing this for a concert, this solo, if you could take us into the practice room and let us know, what is it that what aspect of this line are you worried about? Are you working on? How are you taking these notes on the page and turning them into something that makes, takes our breath away?
So I've played this a few times now in my career, and I think kind of the first instinct, of course, I think we know, and I'll let Styra talk more about this because she certainly knows it better than I, but we know that this quartet, this piano quartet, is associated with a time of great personal turmoil, and I suppose you would call it romantic turmoil in a way. He called it his kind of Wertherzeit. And I'll let Styra talk about this, but I think this is not, to me, the first instinct to play this solo is just to milk everything, to go full out romantic and try to make everything
Yes.
everything equally intense. But actually, as the more I've played this, the more I've realized I feel often when Brahms uses the cello, certainly I find this in the second piano concerto solo, and here there's a sense of bittersweet in this. That a lot of the beauty from this, it comes, of course, the chord progressions. It is, I think some of the greatest love stories are not happy stories. I mean, what would Casablanca be if Elsa had gone off with Rick? I mean, there's a sadness and a beauty that are in this. And for me to get this out, to get the right flavor for this, you have to let the music kind of speak in its own voice. You don't overdo it. You just kind of let the chord, everything's in there, everything's in the music, and you just let it sing. You just kind of back off and the music almost plays itself. If you do too much, you start to put yourself over the music, and there's so much in there. And it's taken me a while to learn this because your first instinct is to push as hard as you can in a way. And it's taken a while to let the long line and the harmonies really do the work here, because it is one of the most gorgeous lines, and it's almost so perfectly written that if you put too much in it, you ruin it.
I couldn't agree more. When you first asked that question, Evan, my thought was, well, you just play it. But I want to explain something. In Brahms's early years, he was undoubtedly really in love with Clara Schumann in a hopeless way. Here's the wife of his mentor and the person who really helped promote him in a very, very large way, career. And now he falls in love with this guy's wife. She's married. She just gave birth to her 7th child. By the way, not Brahms's, because the day that Brahms entered that house, she wrote in her diary that she was pregnant already. So let's get rid of that idea that some people have that Felix was his child. And the early letters show that he was infatuated with her. There is simply no other word. But that ended. Their relationship changed entirely. But Brahms was often in love with other women. Clara is not by any means the only woman in his life. He was actually engaged to a young woman named Agatha von Siebold. And in that book of mine, there is a picture of him where you can see he's wearing an engagement ring. And that was broken off because that's another story. Someday, if you want to talk about that, we can have a discussion. However, by the time this Opus 60 piano quartet was written in 2 pieces, the first 2 movements are from the Wertherzeit. And Werther is a novel by Goethe about a young man who eventually shoots himself out of um, out of despair of his love, unfulfilled love for a married woman. And when Brahms sent this opus to his publisher, he said, "You ought to publish this, or you can publish this with a cover of a man in a yellow frock jacket and blue pants," which is the clothing that Goethe was wearing apparently when he killed himself. But the last two movements were written 15 years later, in 1875, I think. And at that time, he really loved, maybe not in a passionate way, Elizabeth von Herzogenberg, to whom he gave that movement's manuscript. She was the owner of the manuscript. And so if you want to talk about the meaning of it, think of her rather than Clara Schumann. So I hope that's not disappointing. But the fact is, Brahms was a person, whatever his outer mode was, there was a great deal of love in that man. And you cannot think of so many of the passages of his music without understanding that this is a guy who understood what love is.
I love that you mentioned that he understood what love was, and that there were maybe many people, romantic loves of his, friends of his. It's a nice way for us to turn to the last work on the program, perhaps. I'm curious to get your insight into one of these late piano works that in your book I read, he referred to as these lullabies of my sorrows. Maybe you can put the intermezzi that we're going to hear in context.
Well, before I do that, I want to say that Brahms is many things, and it's very common to take a comment like that and say, "Oh, he was a sad, lived a." Brahms wrote at the same time the lullaby, the Hungarian dances, and the German requiem. That's who Brahms is, multifaceted. It's true that there was a very deep, dark side to him as well. But every day he enjoyed his cigars and his schnapps, and he wrote so many letters, by the way, to friends, far more than any of us do. Well, a lot of them are to 100 letters in that book are to Clara Schumann, so let's discount them. But he had many, many, many friends, and he wrote letters to them. So he was not a lonely person, which some people say, if you can read that he was a lonely man. He was a loner, but that's not the same thing as saying he was lonely. But he definitely had deep sorrows. For example, he regretted the way he treated Agatha von Siebold, the woman to whom he was engaged very briefly. And he once confessed that to a friend. That was the only real thing that he regretted in his life. Quite interesting. What are the other sorrows? Well, you can imagine someone who felt deeply. And it's true that he called these, we know this from friends who quoted him, that he called them the lullabies of his sorrow. And the very first one that you're going to hear is in fact a lullaby with a text attached to it. And these pieces were really not meant in his mind for public performance, although he did give permission to a very good friend of his, Ignaz Berl, to perform them for 1 year. They were his for that year. Nobody else could play them. And then other people did. The first performances were his. And then I don't know, Ivan Schutz, his good friends whom he trusted to play this music. So they're to be played, their music to be cherished, but they're personal music. They're not extrovert. They're not really concert hall music. And they don't end with any kind of flourish. So they're not so easy in a way for performances.
But they are heart-stoppingly beautiful. I'm really looking forward to hearing them on November 12th.
Well, they are. They're some of his most, one of the first one, in fact, the one that is actually a lullaby, is certainly one of his most famous and often played piano pieces. And I love the way the melody is in the middle. You know, it's not operatic. By the way, though, because half of Brahms's output is vocal, that's a useful thing to think about when you're playing his music.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't realize that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about how Brahms can be so many things, and I think that's part of what we're trying to show in this concert, the different sides. But I have to say, some of my very favorite Brahms is kind of this autumnal Brahms, the things he wrote at the end that have just this kind of heart-stopping wistfulness to them, to me. I'm not sure that there's any composer I know of that did this better than Brahms, that showed this kind of, maybe Strauss in the four last songs, but there's something just that characterizes the bittersweetness of life in a way that I don't see any other composer.
I think that's true. But I would love to ask you, Brendan, how do you explain how a piece can sound autumnal? I try to think myself what it is, and it's not so easy.
I mean, it's kind of like trying to describe the flavor of a food or something, right? Or how to describe how it feels to be something. To me, it's like it's like that old Supreme Court case on pornography. I know it when I see it, right? I mean, I don't know how I would put it into words, but I know how it makes me feel instantly. And I think
Brahms is famous for that. Lateness and Brahms is the title of a book that was written not so long ago by a famous musicologist. So you're not the only, I mean, we all know, as you say, when you hear it, but I don't know how to define it.
I think that's a great question for us to invite our audience to ponder when they come on November 12th. Be listening for these nostalgic autumnal late works, but also that zesty, gypsy inspired music that Britain's putting together from the Hungarian dances. Of course, I'm excited to hear these, I think, two rarely performed vocal quartets that we're going to hear, plus the really monumental C minor piano quartet.
maybe one of his most dramatic pieces, I think.
Yes,
be...
and by the way, what I was going to say, the scherzo of that Opus 60 really refers back. That is music that was written when he was much, much, much younger. And if you listen to the scherzo in the piano quintet, it has the same character. And the FAE sonata scherzo has the same character. So those are really a different Brahms, a younger Brahms, passionate and whatever.
Well, it sounds like we're going to have quite a complete sonic portrait of this composer's life and the kind of music that he's written. Styra, thank you so much for offering some time to us today, and I really enjoyed all of your comments.
It's my pleasure, believe me.
So I hope, hopefully Styra will be able to join us on the live stream, and I think you will be able to meet her sister in person if you come down to the match. They are quite a family, and if you want to learn more about Brahms, really, I have to agree with Gil. This is the book for me. So I'm thrilled to know you, and really thank you for spending some of your afternoon with us.
Thank you. Good luck.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Brenton, too. We'll see everybody on November 12th.